I call to order the meeting to continue with the high-level thematic debate on the Ocean and Sustainable Development Goal 14, Life Below Water.
On that. Maximo, I think he's teed it up really well for you there to speak from the kind of FAO context of really what's being done. We heard quite a lot there about the difference around the world in fisheries management and in fairness and in trade and so on, and how different these things are playing out in the Pacific, for example, versus the other side of the world. Do you want to speak to some of the points? Perhaps you've taken some notes from some of the delegations there, and then we'll come to you, Shakuntala, to close out. Thank you, Maximo.
Thank you very much. Let me raise 4 points. First, it's clear that fisheries, both ocean and aquaculture, will play a crucial role in nutrition, and is playing a crucial role. It's clear, as I explained at the beginning, that it's extremely efficient. So it's a huge opportunity, given that today we have 3 billion people that cannot access to healthy diets. So that's the most important point. The second point is that subsidies are a problem, especially subsidies which create distortions and subsidies which are on capital and operation that could create an increase of unreported, illegal, and unregulated fishing. But it's important to separate those subsidies to other subsidies that will, for example, support small farmers, small fisheries, support indigenous population. And that's where the modeling plays a role. Because with the modeling tools that we have now in our hands, we can simulate and model what are the potential impacts of removing those distortive and bad subsidies, and what will be the effects of that, and how that will benefit sustainability, how we will minimize those negative trade-offs, and how that money can be reallocated. That's aligning incentives properly, but we need to bring evidence, and we need to have data in place. Third, it is important to understand that management and management failures that we're facing today are central, and that's the cause, and one of the major causes behind the problem, the underlying causes. So we need to look at the lack of institutional, the lack of scientific and management capacity, the lack of monitoring, control and surveillance systems, and in some cases, lack of political will. And of course, the poorest countries will be the most unequal on this. And that's where we need to bring cooperation north-north, north-south, south-south, to be able to implement the best practices to minimize those management issues, because the management will be central. There were several questions linked to the Food System Summit and what we can do with the Food System Summit. For me, the first thing is to bring evidence. And that's what we are trying to do with the modeling exercise. And that's where we need data. And we need to raise this concern so that people understand that the better the data we have and the better the capacity to model these potential impacts is the more we can bring in terms of results in policies and influence policy. Second, there is also a need to improve the understanding of how sustainable fisheries and aquaculture support livelihoods, food security and nutrition, and the achievement of SDGs by having better data and offering evidence-based policy advice. If we truly achieve blue transformation, we estimate that the consumption of fish and fish products will grow between 20 kilograms per person and year to 25.6 kilograms per person and year by 2050. A 25% per capita growth as we approach 10 billion people will do a lot to address hunger and malnutrition. That's a big challenge that we have in the Food System Summit. And this can be done.
Yeah,
and that's why we want to push forward.
I have to sadly stop you there because But Maximo, what are the main obstacles that are really preventing fisheries and aquaculture from being managed sustainably? How can we develop solutions or adapt existing approaches to support the sector to adapt also to climate change? Thank you, Maximo. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Let me start by saying that one has to remember that fish is the most efficient converter of food to flesh, because they do not regulate their temperature and live in water, thus requiring less skeleton investment. It outpaces chicken, pork, and certainly beef in their efficiency. With 1 kilogram of feed, you get 1 kilogram of fish, but the same feed will only get you 150 grams of beef or 280 grams of pork. Surprisingly, given the now well-known capacity of fish to address micronutrient deficiency, especially in pregnant women and children under 5 years of age, it was only in 2014 when the CFA's high-level panel of experts recognized the incredibly role of fish has secured a world without hunger and malnutrition. In this context, although they connect through the value chain, the fisheries and aquaculture subsectors have very different challenges. Capture fisheries is the only major food production system that relies on the natural cycles of nature, and as such, it needs dynamic, responsive, and adaptive management to succeed. 1 in 3 commercially exploited fish stocks is unsustainably fished, and these stocks are largely where management is not effectively implemented. Our data, confirmed by the latest academic evidence, shows that where management is implemented, stocks are rebuilding and sustainability is being achieved. But the reasons for management failures are complex: lack of institutional, scientific, and management capacity, lack of monitoring, control, and surveillance systems, and in some cases, lack of political will. Illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, for example, is a direct consequence of these failures, which cannot be resolved without addressing the underlying causes. The only solution is capacity building at all levels, including demonstrating that political action pays off and recognize that effective management is the best conservation tool. Aquaculture, on the other hand, has different challenges. And let's not forget that despite this, the sector has been growing at 5.3% per year since the turn of the century. The challenges to further growth include access to land and water, better and clear regulatory frameworks, more access to finance, feeds and fingerlings, genetic improvements and diversification of strains, appropriate development of fish value chains, and consumer education to offset misconceptions. But from a sustainability perspective, the biggest challenges are the control of diseases and affluents and regulation on habitat use, as well as on the use of antimicrobials. Market solutions, including certification schemes, can be significant in addressing these challenges. Let me conclude with a few words on climate change adaptation, which will be crucial for the future of the sector. We believe that we have technical solutions to adapt most aquaculture systems to many of the impacts of climate change, from growing different species or strains to changing location or enhancing water treatments, but they may be costly and will require regulatory support and consumer awareness. For fisheries, it is more difficult, especially to adapt institutions, management systems, and the science basis for management to cope with the expected redistribution of species. Fish know no boundaries, but our management is based on political boundaries. FAO works with many countries and regional bodies to analyze the institutional and political frameworks so that they can adapt. Thank you.
Let's go back to you, Maximo, and we've kind of touched on how fisheries and aquaculture can support the success of a number of SDGs, not just 14. But I wonder if you could just speak to what incentives and opportunities exist for that collective action to ensure wide implementation of binding and non-binding international instruments in support of sustainable livelihoods in sustainable fisheries and aquaculture. Quite a long question there, Maximo. You're on mute, sorry. Someone had to do it. Thank you for it being you.
Thank you. So one of the things that I think is extremely important in agriculture and nutrition is alignment of incentives. And fisheries governance is challenging, and this in turn affects the sustainability of fishery-based livelihoods. And the good news is that we have several agreed international instruments to support better fisheries management, and there is increasing progress with regard to their implementation. So I would like to bring two examples which I believe open opportunities of collective action, which you refer in the question, and which I think could have on the national and one on the multinational level. Let me start with the national level. The voluntary guidelines for securing sustainable small-scale fisheries in the context of food security and poverty eradication, what is called the SSF guidelines, are non-binding instruments agreed in 2014 to secure the sustainability of small-scale fisheries to end hunger and poverty and strengthen human rights. They are a tool to guide the dialogue, policy processes, and action at all levels, from local communities to global fora. They are about people and not just about fish. The biggest incentive for collective action in relation to their implementation is their origin. They are the result of the participatory process in which countries, small-scale fishery organizations, and other stakeholders engage and consider each other needed. These participatory dimensions are also forms the basis for the implementation through a human rights-based approach. Several countries, for example, Tanzania, Namibia, and Madagascar, are already developing national plans of action for this type of guidelines, the SSF guidelines implementation, with a view to create a positive change in fishing communities at the local level, and many others are exploring how to incorporate the guidelines in the national legislation. Many other countries are exploring how to incorporate the guidelines in their national legislation too. The second example I would like to bring refers to the importance of the regional and sub-regional dimensions, regional economic integration and interconnectivity in addressing the 2030 Agenda of Sustainable Development. A strong incentive for collective action is rooted in international law, including the law of the sea, underlying principle on the state's duty to cooperate. The main mechanisms for organizing this cooperative management for internationally shared fishery resources are through the regional fishery bodies, and in particularly, a subset of these are the regional fishery management organizations, and thus have authority to set mandatory management measures. Their number and memberships have increased over the years, indicating an interest from states to work together to address sustainability issues. At the latest count, 152 states and regional economic integration organizations were members of one or more of these 22 RFMOs in place, which have inspection schemes, observer programs, data and compliance committee, and many other specific instruments of collaboration. To further encourage these positive trends, supporting collaboration and strengthening existing mechanisms for cooperation, including using market incentives such as certification and eco-labeling schemes, could be a significant incentive. There is also a need to improve the understanding of how sustainable fisheries and aquaculture support livelihoods, food security and nutrition, and of course, achievements of the SDGs by having better data and offering evidence-based policy advice. And normally we miss the importance of data. And here is central to understand how it could be very useful to put priorities in place to give the proper policy advice. Thank you.
My question to the panelists is the following. Considering that the reform of harmful fisheries subsidies could be one of the most important actions that governments can take to protect the oceans, how could the UN Food Systems Summit, to be held next September, raise the profile of this issue in support of the elimination of such subsidies, including those that contribute to IUU fishing? Thank you very much.
New Zealand has been a long-standing and leading advocate of fisheries subsidies reform at the World Trade Organization. We strongly support the WTO Director General's call to conclude the fisheries subsidies negotiations in July.
My delegation highlights the paramount role of millions of small-scale fishers who provide healthy and nutritious food. With respect to the fisheries subsidies, UNICEF support the international efforts to prohibit certain forms of subsidies, which contribute to overcapacity, overfishing, and IUU fishing. Furthermore, UNICEF continues to prioritize various measures in national and international contexts on the fight against IUU fishing pursuant to international law, including UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. Finally, we would like to listen to the views of the panelists on how we, the international community, can reinvigorate our action in ensuring the significance and effectiveness of the fight against IUU fishing.
La coopération internationale demeure essentielle pour contribuer à la mise en œuvre de l'objectif du développement durable 14. À ce titre, la France appelle à la conclusion rapide des négociations à l'OMC sur les subventions contribuant à la surpêche et à la pêche illégale et à la finalisation des négociations dites BBNJ pour l'établissement d'un cadre juridique robuste pour la protection de la biodiversité en haute mer. La science doit nous aider à concilier les objectifs de pêche durable et de sécurité. D'où mes deux questions. Comment la voix de la science dans les discussions sur la dégradation de l'océan peuvent-elles être mieux entendues? Comment rehausser la visibilité du World Ocean Assessment qui met l'accent sur l'interface science-politique sur l'océan?
My first point, the upcoming Food System Summit needs to strongly reflect the important role the ocean and sustainable blue food play in our food systems already, as well as their potential to play an even bigger role. Iceland has, along with others, worked diligently towards this end, and we are looking forward to seeing blue food in the spotlight at the pre-summit in Rome this summer. Secondly, the WTO negotiations in Geneva on a new agreement banning harmful subsidies to fisheries are very important to ensure sustainability of fish stocks and healthy competition in the trade of fish.